the world was your oyster.
Outrageous fortune returns in a moment.
Alrighty.
Julian?
Fantastic to meet you.
Yeah.
I was there, Bitcoin 2022 as a fan, way back in the audience. Now I'm right on stage with you. That's awesome.
Yeah, I got scammed into coming here.
Yeah.
I think Jonathan was arranging it, and I think it was something like I could just do it by video remotely, but then I felt bad because I'm in Victoria, and it's kind of like a dick move if I'm remoting into Vancouver and I can just come here, so I just came.
So he could have paid top dollar to take a seaplane here, but you took the ferry because you wanted to stack sats.
That's right. It's a bear market, right?
Yeah. Gotta save that money. The first thing, for some of the people here who might not know your past, who are you and what is your Bitcoin journey, Samson?
So I got into Bitcoin, I always say officially I got into Bitcoin in 2014, late 2014. That was around the time I started talking to my friend Bobby at BTC China to start as an advisor there. And I was on officially in 2015 as the COO. So that's generally what I say is my timeline. But I knew about Bitcoin before, and I was paying attention to Bitcoin, I think, from probably 2013 or so, when it was like on my radar. But I didn't really get into it until probably 2015. But by trade, I'm actually a game developer. So I used to work at Relic. It's like kitty corner over there. That's their new office. When I was there, it was at Bentall 5 downtown. But then after Relic, I went to SiteMasher. I was doing website development as a platform, as a service. And then I went to Ubisoft and spun up a studio for them in Western China. And then I started my own Pixomatic, which is still going. And I was doing Pixomatic and BTC China at the same time. And then somewhere along the way, I went and joined Blockstream with Adam Back. And then I decided to leave and start Jan 3, which is the company I'm running now. So it's a long, windy road.
Wow. So you announced Jan 3 at Bitcoin 2022, and you made 3 big announcements there of these different nation states. There was Prospera, Roatan, island off the coast of Honduras. There's Madeira, which is an autonomous region of Portugal. And then you mentioned that there was some collaboration going on with one of the senators, I think it was Indira, from Mexico.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you have any updates on any of those projects?
So let me think. Prospera is still going. So they made Bitcoin legal tender following in the footsteps of El Salvador. And I think they're just focusing on building now. There are some headwinds there because the Honduran government doesn't seem to like the concept of ZAs. So that's a zone for economic development and employment, ZEDE. And they're trying to crack down on that. And we actually set up, Jan 3 set up a company in Prospera. So we've been going through that whole process. And we actually encountered some of those challenges. So normally you'll need a tax ID from the Honduran government before you can get a bank account. And sadly, we still need bank accounts to do various things in the world. Hopefully that will be phased out. But they wouldn't give us tax ID. And I think it's the same case now for a lot of the new entities set up in Honduras. So that's like a very obvious challenge, right? They're not being that friendly right now to companies doing things that we're doing or involved in Bitcoin law. But yeah, there are headwinds there, but then when there are challenges, there are also opportunities too. So we actually linked them up with Tower Bank in Panama, who is trying to be very Bitcoin friendly. And they're actively in discussions now to figure out if Tower Bank can supply banking services to all Honduran Prospera companies.
Oh, wow.
So that's the update there. In Madeira, there will be an update. I think they're going to announce it at the Bitcoin conference in Amsterdam. I'm not going to steal their thunder, but they have a small progress update. But things are slow in general. Mexico is still going to be slow. Basically, any country with a central bank, it's an uphill battle because they want to keep their money printer. They don't want to give it up. And we have allies in Mexico like Senator Indira Campos, Ricardo Salinas, but it's going to take time. So those are the updates from those 3.
So what does an average day actually, or week, look like for you with January 3rd? What are you actually doing day to day?
It's a lot of meetings and calls, and
A lot of confidential stuff, probably.
generally just meetings and calls, and still trying to finish the Aqua wallet. So we have not yet relaunched it. So Aqua is a Bitcoin and Liquid wallet We brought it with us from Blockstream to Jan 3, and we've been making a number of improvements to it. A lot of time is spent trying to fix the UI and make it better. So the goal for that wallet is to get Bitcoin into the hands of more people. And a key component of that is having Tether in Liquid as a very prominent feature of the wallet. So if most Bitcoiners, they don't like stablecoins, but we've ceded a lot of ground to stablecoins, right? A large chunk of it is on all the shitcoin chains, like, I can say shitcoins, right? A lot of shitcoin chains like Ethereum and Tron and Solana and all that, because they feature it very prominently. But most Bitcoin wallets don't do that. I think the mentality is shifting now, especially with Lightning Labs. They want to do Taro, right? And one of the key things for them is LUSD. They're kind of ripping off Liquid, because Liquid is L dash something for the asset too. But well, that's another topic for another day. But yeah, like, I think more and more Bitcoin wallets will start to add stablecoin functionality, because it is very important, especially if you want to accelerate hyper-Bitcoinization, which is our mission. You want more people to get into Bitcoin, but you don't necessarily need to say jump into Bitcoin right away. You can say, take a stablecoin first. And stablecoins in a lot of the developing world, the global south, it's very important for them because they need to lock in that dollar value, because a lot of their business is still in dollar-denominated things, right? If you're a merchant and you want to pay your supplier and you're taking Bitcoin as payment, maybe that's not a good idea because your costs are still dollar-denominated. And for a lot of people in the world, we can probably weather a dip. Well, we don't like it, but we can survive it. But for them, if they take like a 50% haircut, they could go out of business. So I think there's a natural demand for dollars in a lot of these countries that have high inflation and just poor monetary policy. So they naturally will want a dollar-denominated asset, like a stablecoin. So if we can give that to them in Aqua, and it's on the Liquid network, which does not involve any shitcoinery, I think that's a win. So the key for Aqua is that when you load it up, you'll see like Bitcoin, Liquid Bitcoin, and Liquid USDT. And the push will be to get more adoption in Latin America, and we're integrating Liquid Taxi from Volpum Ventures. So people technically could just use Liquid Tether without having to even get Liquid Bitcoin to pay for the network fees, the transaction fees. So you can just get dollars and spend dollars. But the big thing is we're removing all the friction and just letting them use it. And hopefully we can take some market cap away from the stablecoin issuance on the shitcoin chains.
Maybe you could dive into that a little bit, because I know, like as you mentioned, a lot of people are using Tether and these other stablecoins on other crypto networks, shitcoin networks. What exactly is Liquid? It's been around for a while, but it's not, a big dominant player for stablecoins. And it sounds like you're hoping to kind of make it. But it is more than just offer a platform for stablecoins. You're using it also to do security issuance and stuff on top of Bitcoin. Maybe you could just explain how it works and what the innovation is there.
Right. So I guess we'll take it way back to 2014, maybe even earlier. But this is when Dr. Adam Back was discussing with Greg Maxwell, a former CTO of Blockstream, about ways to scale Bitcoin. And one of the things they came up with was the concept of a sidechain. So this is a separate blockchain that's anchored to Bitcoin. So you effectively lock up Bitcoin on the main chain and unlock it in a sidechain. So you enforce the rules of 21 million coins. There's no token involved. There's no tokenomics. It's in some ways it's like Lightning. You're locking up Bitcoin to use it in other ways. So we do call Liquid a layer 2. But unlike Lightning, there is actually a blockchain there. And the properties of a sidechain can vary. So Liquid is 1 minute block times. It has confidential transactions by default. So your transaction sizes are larger, but because you have a block every minute, it roughly balances itself out. You can also issue assets in Liquid. So anybody can mint an asset. You can create a stable coin. We have a LCAD, Canadian dollar stablecoin from Bull Bitcoin, and there's a JPY stablecoin in some sandbox in Japan from Digital Garage. But there's also things like game currency. So my game Infinite Fleet, we're minting the game currency on Liquid just to see if we can do something interesting where players can do atomic swaps for the game currency and a game asset. You can do NFTs on Liquid. There's a platform called Raretoshi built for Bitcoin artists. We started that at Blockstream because there's a lot of Bitcoin artists and they still want to make NFTs, and they still want to have that benefit of trading them or tradability. But then they had to do them on OpenSea on Ethereum, which is kind of messed up. So we just said, well, we can build it on Liquid, because at the end of the day, what is an NFT? It's just a token, but it's a one-off token that is not fungible. So there's nothing really innovative about it, but it's still better for an artist that wants to make something to use a Bitcoin sidechain rather than a shitcoin chain. But yeah, Liquid does a lot of different things. And I think the more assets that you have in Liquid, the better, because all the assets and transactions are confidential. So if I send you a Liquid transaction, people looking at a block explorer can actually see what was being sent. They'll see like a little bit of LBTC, Liquid Bitcoin, paying the fees, but they don't know if I sent you, a game spaceship or if I sent you USDT. So it's privacy preserving. And I think having a dimension of privacy in a stablecoin is good, because you actually are quite close to Chaumian eCash, right? There's obviously centralization in a stablecoin, but if no one can see what you're transacting and the transactions cannot be censored, it's just as good as Chaumian eCash, right? And that's the other thing too. So Liquid is a federation. There's 15 functionaries. These are kind of the operators of the block producers.
So they're kind of like validators in some sense.
They're block producers, so
Okay.
they just produce the blocks. But these functionary servers are black boxes. They cannot censor transactions. They can't do anything. They host them in their data center. And most of these functionaries are crypto exchanges too. So the origin of Liquid was, it was pitched as a inter-exchange settlement network. So all the different companies that are using it can just allow their users to move Bitcoin very rapidly and avoid bottlenecks of slow blocks or delayed blocks or whatever, so you can top up your account quickly on another exchange. But yeah, there's 15 of these guys, and they're just running the network. We can have a number of them go down, and the network will still function. But largely, the network is controlled and operated by those functionaries. So Blockstream is a service provider. Blockstream provides software updates, and they can choose to run it or not. But it is in the hands of them. It's not controlled by any one company.
Gotcha. I know that I was looking up Liquid. One of the features that you're hoping to do with it, I think, is launch more things like securities potentially on this. Yeah. Is that something that's being, I know you don't work at Blockstream currently, is that something that you think could eventually replace the current model of the way that securities are kind of issued or settled? It seems that Liquid has a lot of advantages, similar to like a lot of other blockchains claiming, but without the centralization, the shitcoinery, and it's on another Bitcoin layer essentially.
Yeah. So I think there's a big opportunity for tokenized securities or digital securities, and using a public chain with confidentiality. You can do things like atomic swap. So Blockstream has a security token called the BMN, and Infinite Fleet has one called EXO. But these security tokens, they can be traded peer-to-peer. So you don't need to use a centralized service like an exchange or Robinhood where they can freeze you from trading. I think the traction, we're still gaining traction, and we need more securities on Liquid, but I think it's the way to go, because you kind of have the optionality. You can be traded on an exchange, a security token exchange with the right license. So Bitfinex Securities has a license out of Kazakhstan, and they should be getting one from El Salvador to do the Bitcoin bonds. I know you want to talk about that.
Oh, yeah.
But more and more exchanges will support security tokens, because that actually is a very good use case for tokenization. Not making some utility token for paying for your Wi-Fi, but actually doing securities. Because securities right now are pretty shitty. They're run on really bad platforms. In Canada, it's like, what do you have? You have Questrade. That's about it, and it's pretty bad. Trading is limited to working hours minus holidays, and we have a new holiday on Monday.
Yeah.
So it's even less trading time.
You got naked short selling too, which happens all the time.
Naked short selling. Yeah. But I could see like a market based off of security tokens that is just largely peer-to-peer traded through atomic swap. So for anyone that doesn't know, an atomic swap is it's a trade in which both parties construct each side of the trade, and it's either executed all at once or not at all. So there's no counterparty risk. It's not I send you my security token, then you send me some dollars after. So that is a very interesting mechanism. But the key thing, I think, is the privacy part of it, where you can't be front run because all the transactions are confidential. So long term, if we keep building on Liquid or some Liquid-like federation, what you get is everything is a dark pool, right? dark pools today are not really dark pools. Someone's running the dark pool. Someone can see all the transactions. Just certain people can't, like the plebs can't.
Not you.
But imagine like everything is done on a liquid-like federation, and all the transactions are confidential. Then everything's a dark pool, and you could probably reduce the regulatory overhead around that, because if no one knows what anyone else is trading, you don't need to regulate it, right? There's no insider trading because nobody knows what anyone else is doing.
So you have a new team member, Prince Philip of Serbia. What is his role, or what do you hope his role will be to fulfill within January 3rd? And maybe you could tell the audience here a little bit more, as you know him one-on-one.
So what was the last part?
Maybe you could just tell the audience a little bit more about him as a person, as a character, someone that you've met and gotten to know well.
Yeah, so Prince Philip is the the hereditary, I don't know. It's like basically he's the next in line for the throne for Serbia and Yugoslavia, but there is no monarchy, so it was basically canceled sometime in the past few decades. But if they were to restore the monarchy, then he would be the crown prince and eventually the king. And I think that could be a good thing. Constitutional monarchies are not necessarily bad. But yeah, like Prince Philip, he's probably the first royal Bitcoiner, at least that we know of, that's been orange-pilled. And what he brings to Jan 3, so he's not just the prince, he actually works in asset management for a very big firm. So he has a lot of experience with financial products, market structuring, things like that. So he could be very helpful if we were to do more Bitcoin bonds for more nation states, advising on that front. Because that's not my strength. I'm just a game developer. Yeah, he has an interesting network. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with like royal families, but they're all interconnected, and probably some long time ago they're all intermarrying.
Yeah, in the bad way.
Maybe. I'm not going to comment on that. But they're all interconnected. So I have my network, which is the Bitcoiners and everyone that I know from the exchange space. But he brings a new network. And I think if we want to grow the Bitcoin ecosystem, if we want to accelerate hyper-Bitcoinization, you've got to expand that network, right? We need to start orange-pilling royal families and start broadening our reach. And for example, he is a possible inroad for us to Brazil. So I don't know if you guys saw, but a week ago, Brazil was posting, there was news about Brazil looking for advisors for blockchain technology. So he's actually engaged with the ambassador to Serbia from Brazil. And that's an inroad. But more important than that, his mother is a Brazilian princess. So he's connected to the royal family in Brazil too.
Wow.
So eventually we'll make our way there. But it's just like augmenting the my Bitcoin network with the royal family network around the world.
That's awesome. Update on the Bitcoin bonds. Where are they at? Haven't heard anything
Not
about
ready yet.
Bukele from a while.
Well, we're still waiting for them to pass the new securities laws, which would allow the bonds to be issued. They had a number of black swan events to deal with, like the war, the gang violence, but I think they're getting back on track. I've said there's a number of podcasts, so it's like my standard go-to answer. But we're still engaging with them, going back and forth. There was a time when another group wanted to change the law, and they tabled a different version of the digital securities law, but I think now it's going back to the original one. So they just need to put it to Congress and vote on it, maybe make some final modifications and then pass it. Once the law is passed, then they can go ahead with the capital raise. But we are coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the announcement of the Bitcoin bonds. So I'm poking them and saying, probably should do it before 1 year is up. So we'll see.
I think today or a couple of days from now it'll be the 1-year anniversary of El Salvador's Bitcoin Day.
I think it's September 7th.
Oh, maybe I missed it.
You missed it.
You've been down there a couple times. You have a dialogue going with Bukele. How do you feel the first year has gone in terms of adoption down there?
It's not bad. It would be better with the Bitcoin bonds, right?
Yeah.
But I can't really complain. Like, things move slowly. It's actually a miracle that they passed the Bitcoin law that quickly and that they decided to do a Bitcoin bond. And they're still, even with the market downturn, they're still bullish on Bitcoin, right? They could have just said, well, we're packing it up, we give up. But President Bukele really does believe in Bitcoin. Like, he was a Bitcoiner before even Bitcoin Beach. So he's got the conviction, and it's just going to take time. Like, a lot of these things will take time. So I'm just thankful that we do have one country, at least, that is embracing Bitcoin as money.
I don't know if it was someone where I heard you or Max Kaiser mention that there was an attempt to make inroads for Bitcoin law in Guatemala, but it kind of fell through. Do you know, maybe you could tell us something about that?
So I did meet with the central bank in Guatemala. There's a fintech association, they organized a meeting. So when I was there, we met with a big room of central bankers, and a couple of them have Bitcoin actually, so that's pretty cool. But there's also some no-coiners in there. It's, you know, it's what you would expect amongst a broad mix of people. But Guatemala doesn't need to do Bitcoin as legal tender because they have this thing called divisas. It's a law about currency. So they recognize foreign currencies, and foreign currencies can be used in Guatemala. And of course, Bitcoin is a foreign currency because it's the currency of El Salvador. So technically, they don't need to do anything. They can just say, like, according to the law that already exists, you can use Bitcoin. So even without that declaration, people are already growing. There's a IBEX Mercado. They're setting up a number of merchants, onboarding a number of merchants to the Bitcoin network. So it's all happening. It's just having some formal acknowledgement of Bitcoin would be really nice. And that was what I was trying to get before the Miami conference. But there's always the coming years.
I think that was one of the more underlooked points of your announcement in Bitcoin 2022 is that not every country is going to look like El Salvador, where there's a Bitcoin law written out and it's clear and cut. There's different ways and roads to adoption. Overall, when you look at the whole map of the earth, what are kind of the things that you would hope to see, if not a straight up Bitcoin law?
So Central African Republic did a Bitcoin law too, right? And Panama was trying, but it got vetoed last minute. But the way I look at it is you don't really need permission to use Bitcoin, but there's ways to optimize Bitcoin in different countries, right? For example, in Canada, we don't need a Bitcoin law. What we need is to remove capital gains tax on Bitcoin. Because in Canada, we can actually trade goods and services for whatever, as long as both parties agree to that medium of exchange. So I could buy, your shoes for chickens if I really wanted to. But we can't do that. The problem is the capital gains part, right? So there are other places around the world, like Switzerland, they could just use Bitcoin. There's no cap gains. Madeira was able to do that. Say they are adopting Bitcoin because, again, no capital gains, right? So there's ways to optimize it, and different countries will have different approaches, and there should be different strategies to go about it.
One of the things that's just opened my mind since the whole El Salvador Bitcoin law is just, I think everyone maybe has like a map in the back of their head of like what's going to be the next country. And some people go down the road of just actually learning about the cultures and the financial history, the monetary history of all these different countries. I assume you've done the same. You've probably looked at a lot of different places where a Bitcoin law would be viable and probably tried to reach out to those places first. What are some of the most interesting places that you've tried to kind of like pursue moving, some regulatory stuff forward?
So I would say Latin America is probably the most interesting, just because of necessity. It'd be nice if Switzerland does it or Canada does it. Well, actually, it's getting to be a necessity in Canada too.
Yeah.
But I think the easy low-hanging fruit is Latin America, just because of necessity. And the interesting thing is what's going to happen in the next few years. So I did a tweet a couple of days ago. I guess I got ahead of myself, but I wrote down different countries and years. That's actually the election years for those countries. But with elections comes change. And I believe Bitcoin will become a key part of platforms for getting elected. So Guatemala is 2023. Which was the other one, 2023? I forgot. Maybe Argentina. But I think it's going to be a key topic, just because El Salvador is there, right? El Salvador is Guatemala's second biggest trading partner. If they don't use Bitcoin and trade with them in Bitcoin, it doesn't make much sense, right? You're kind of limiting your own growth. So I think they have to have that discussion. And their elections are coming, so it's going to be a forced issue. And then in 2024, you have the halving. And fingers crossed, market will recover by then. I think it'll recover sooner. But at worst, it's around the halving. But after the halving, then you have the El Salvador election, right? And I think President Bukele might run again. And him running again, the key is he's massively popular in the region. I think if he decides to run again, he'll win again. And that's a big endorsement for Bitcoin from that country. And then you have a number of other ones also in 2024. And then a few more coming in 25. But I think with the halving, with El Salvador, maybe it's going to kick off a wave of adoption in the next 3 to 4 years, if not 5 years. And there's also a chance for us in Canada too with Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah, on that note, I think a lot of Bitcoiners, and there's some criticism within the Bitcoin, let's just say maximalist community around coming out and just endorsing a politician because they have a Bitcoin policy, because they have a Bitcoin stance. I think in the future, you're going to have multiple parties that support Bitcoin. It won't just be one side hates it, one side loves it. You're going to get left and people from the right supporting it. As a Bitcoiner, how do we become more adept at analyzing and maybe criticizing politicians? It feels so early that we're just endorsing any politician that loves Bitcoin. We're saying go Poilievre, you understand sound money, but eventually I imagine there's going to be a spectrum of politicians behind it. How do we become, I guess, better and more adept at understanding these things instead of just blindly pushing who pushes our cause?
Yeah, I think it's not good to automatically endorse. So I actually met Pierre after Miami. I flew back early from Miami. I missed the Sound Money Festival. It's all for Bitcoin, but personal sacrifice. I met him and I had a chat with him over breakfast, and I think he's legit. But I would just say, in general, we should be cautious about who we support, because there are examples of politicians that will say anything to get elected. I mean, surprise.
The mayor of Miami had Miami coin or whatever, right? He was a big Bitcoiner, and then he had his own thing.
But maybe he got scammed because that stacks, right? So they're saying they're built on Bitcoin, but they have their own shitcoin.
Yeah.
So maybe they just, I think we forget how early we are sometimes, and politicians are not necessarily the most well-versed in technology, right? So it's easy for someone to go up to them and say, we're building on Bitcoin. Do you want to adopt Bitcoin? But it's really Miami coin. And they're like, yeah, let's do it. That's very easy for them to fall into that trap. And then, of course, you have the other politicians that just want to say anything to get elected, right? Anything for a vote. But I would say give them the benefit of the doubt. Don't go and campaign on their behalf until you really understood what they're trying to accomplish. But let's just take Pierre for example. I think he's really legit. He is definitely in it to fix the country. He sees how broken Canada is, and he's been supportive of the Freedom Convoy. He's talking about defunding the CBC, a lot of these things. Even without the Bitcoin part, I agree with him wholeheartedly, right? Yeah. So I think I would back him, and if he's campaigning, I'll contribute to whatever I can to the campaign. But I'm not going to simp for him, right? And at the end of the day, it's really we have an alignment of goals. One thing I like to say is Bitcoin encourages an alliance of equals, right? We are all equal. We hold the Bitcoin that we accumulate, and we're not subservient to another person, like in Ethereum or in shitcoins. It doesn't matter what Adam Back says. If I disagree, then he can't change the policy. No one can. And that's what makes Bitcoin really great. But at the end of the day, it comes down to what choices do we have. So without Pierre, who else can we support? There's really nobody. So in the absence of options, I say go with what you've got, and at least we can get the ball rolling. And maybe the next batch, like I said, I think Pierre's legit, but if he is not, there's always next time, and at least we can organize. So Brad Mills, NVK, and I were talking about putting together something called Bit Action, sort of like a educational, progressive, not progressive,
like a political action committee.
Political action group to educate and work with all parties, not necessarily conservatives, but even those liberal guys too. But get them understanding Bitcoin, so you avoid things like Miami coin at least. But if we get enough people, then we could be a strong political force. And then politicians have to contend with the single issue Bitcoin voters. And I think that is useful.
How many people here got into Bitcoin after 2018? So there was a thing prior to this, and maybe, there's two versions of them actually, called the block size wars. And you were a big part of that. And it's a thing that I think a lot of Bitcoiners they might have missed as they've kind of, maybe they got their inroads through Michael Saylor. But it's a really important thing, I think, to talk about, and you have a pretty close connection to it. And I think it's especially important because we've just seen the second, major cryptocurrency, Ethereum, change its consensus mechanism to something god-awful. Can you explain what exactly were the block size wars and what Bitcoiners should take away from those events?
Well, the block size wars were basically a bunch of companies trying to change the rules of Bitcoin protocol. So it's a very innocuous change, which is we need to increase the block size to something bigger so that everyone in the world can use Bitcoin and transact for free or for pennies, right? It sounds good on the surface, just like UBI sounds good, or Inflation Reduction Act sounds good, but it doesn't really work because if you can change the rules, then you can change the rules for anything, and especially if you're changing the rules for some lofty do-gooder thing, you can change it very badly in a number of ways. You can also go into the line of thinking that there's too few Bitcoin. There's only 21 million Bitcoin. Everyone in the world should have one Bitcoin for themselves, right? So we increase the supply. But it's a slippery slope, and that was what the big blocker camp was trying to do. They were trying to force a change on the protocol. And that time, I would say, was a dangerous time in Bitcoin because mining pool centralization was much higher than it is today. You had a lot less people taking coins off of exchanges, and all the big Bitcoin companies, or at least the companies we thought were Bitcoin companies, were talking about doing this. So it was a much more dire and dark time. I don't know if people have read the book, The Block Size Wars, but I don't think it fully captured how bad it was back then. Like, a lot of people were really depressed that all these companies were ganging up and trying to force the change on the network. So basically, the ragtag bunch of UASFers got together early on and were starting to push back on that narrative and trying to avoid changing the protocol. So we eventually led up to the SegWit 2x New York Agreement force change, and then the UASF nodes running their own version to basically say, we're going to activate SegWit in this way. But we basically won the war, and then the losers are all in Ethereum now.
So there's a lot of FUD, obviously. Always happens with bear markets. There's, Bitcoin's using too much energy. There's always something going on. As Bitcoiners in this community, what do you think is maybe the point we should stand the most firm on to kind of like protect our ground?
Probably not your keys, not your coins. So self-custody is important. And just figuring out how to store your keys yourself. I mean, the challenge is when you leave your Bitcoin with someone else, they can re-hypothecate it basically, right? Or they're using the Bitcoin to short or do some other stuff. But just take custody. It's not that difficult, and I think you have to at least do that one step. And then the next step is running your own node. But at least keep your own Bitcoin yourself.
Do you have any unpopular opinions in contrast to other Bitcoiners?
I don't know.
Any controversial opinions that the maxis might get you for?
I think my views on stablecoins are pretty like the maxis wouldn't like that. There's a lot of people that are just like Bitcoin only. But I just think you have to take a pragmatic approach. Like, stablecoins do exist. There's like $100 million of market cap, maybe 90 now or whatever. But that just shows like there's $90 million worth of reasons to offer this. And I think it's an easy on-ramp to get them into something first, like a stablecoin, and then go to Bitcoin. It's harder to make that jump because you already have that natural demand for dollars in countries where their currency is inflating away, right? And their purchasing power is going down. And they know the US dollar, and they can't get US dollars for many reasons, right? First of all, they probably are not able to get a bank account. And next, their country might have some rule saying you cannot convert your peso to dollars. That's not allowed. So then what do? You have to get the asset that you can get, which is a stablecoin, right? So there's a natural drive to that. I think harnessing that is useful. Other unpopular opinions? I don't know. I can't think of anything. Maybe the design of Lightning Network could be better.
Elaborate on that.
I think routing is a bad design. Routing is a pain in the ass. It's difficult. There may have been a better way to do that from day one, but it's too late. We are where we are at now. But I think that's not talked about a lot, the challenges of routing. There's a lot of centralization in Lightning. People are using centralized services because they're not doing their own C Lightning node or LND node. They're outsourcing that. Yeah, I think that's about it.
So I think right now there's the HODL Craig Wright trial going on. What are your theories on who Satoshi is? Do you think it was a group, one person, alive, dead? Do you think he sold all his Bitcoin, or is he still holding? She.
It's Adam back. Just kidding. It's not Adam back. But you don't know for sure, right? But, I think it's not a group of people, because Satoshi was very clear, concise, and coherent in all communications. So I don't think it's a group. Or if it was a group, then there's definitely one person speaking. But looking at everything, I think it's one person. I don't think it's anyone that's hovering around in the space today. He really just did disappear. That's my theory.
What is your go-to, and this will be the last question before we open it up, what is your go-to way of orange pilling no coiners? How do you get them to change their mind?
I don't really focus on orange pilling no coiners because, well, let's get the definition straight. So no coiner is someone like Peter Schiff or Rubini or something like that.
Okay.
They know about Bitcoin. They've known about Bitcoin for probably a decade, and they're still against Bitcoin, right?
So maybe like haven't coiners.
So those are pre-coiners. So there's
pre-coiners.
There's no coiners, pre-coiners, and Bitcoiners. So I don't really try to target pre-coiners. I generally think it's going to come and bite me in the ass later. Is if I tell them to buy at 60K and then they'll come back and say, hey, what happened? And pay me back or make me whole. And then if they don't, if they don't buy it, then when it's up again, they'll come over and say, hey, why didn't you make me buy it? So I generally avoid that. But for a nation state Bitcoin adoption, you kind of have to do that. But it's at a different level. It's not at a personal level where it's going to affect my personal life in any way, right? If Argentina doesn't adopt Bitcoin, they're not going to call me tomorrow and complain, right? So yeah, generally I try not to do that. It's just, at least in my own circles, is either they get it or they don't get it. And it's probably better they figure out for themselves.
Well, I'll just follow up really quick. You're working with a lot of nations, and when they release something like a Bitcoin law, do you think it's imperative on the country and the government to start putting out Bitcoin education, or is it sort of pass the law and let everyone YouTube their way into understanding this asset?
It's probably going to be a mix of both. We'll see. I mean, there's usually grassroots initiatives in the countries that are prone to Bitcoin adoption or leaning towards it. So you have a Bitcoin Beach in El Salvador. There's a Bitcoin Lake in Guatemala. I think there's a Bitcoin Jungle in Costa Rica, right? But generally there are grassroots initiatives in various regions. Mi Primero Bitcoin, my first Bitcoin, I think they're launching educational programs for high school students. So I think they're doing probably a few thousand high school students in El Salvador, but they could expand their program and hit up different countries down the road. Or people can start that up in other countries too. But I think it's generally going to be a mix of both. If they do a Bitcoin law, then they should probably have some top-down government education. I don't know how good it will be, but they'll do something at least. But I think generally grassroots is probably more effective.
Cool. All right. We'll open it up. Any questions?
No? Okay, I'll go.
Quick question around, first, thank you for showing up today and chatting with all of us. Kind of as you talk about stablecoins and whatnot, in regards to atomic swaps, with that obviously being a really interesting way to have permissionless way between people swapping assets, what does liquidity look like for that? And if there is incentives required or like incentivization for liquidity so that these essentially pools can happen, what does that look like and what, how do you see that work?
So right now, I would say liquidity is pretty low. So there's a SideSwap. It's an app, I think, on the App Store, both Android and iOS, and they have a desktop version too. So in SideSwap, you can already trade the BMN, but liquidity is low because it is the security, right? Basically, to get this adoption, you have to have a lot of interesting securities that can be traded for other things. But the security tokens on Liquid are BMN and EXO. There's only 2 right now, right? And I don't even think there's a lot of EXO on the market. And then BMN is it's also like difficult for people to understand because it's tokenization of Blockstream's hash rate, and a lot of people don't understand how that works. So I think we just need more assets, and then we'll see more liquidity. But there are more and more things being built on Liquid. So you have SideSwap, you have Aqua, which is going to push a lot of the liquid assets onto people, and hopefully they don't even need to know it's a liquid asset. They'll just think, it's an asset. But then there's another thing called TDEX. It's I guess it's like a version of Uniswap built on top of Liquid, and if they're successful, they can drive a lot more asset issuance, a lot more volumes, and it functions in the same way. So you have the automatic market makers that will provide liquidity.
So yeah, using similar kind of like algorithm model.
Yeah, look it up. It's tdex.network, I think.
TDEX?
Yeah, TDEX. No worries.
Samson, very nice videos on YouTube and how you met, like you talk in media and all. It's
Thanks.
mind-blowing, and I try to use all those talking points.
In case anyone can't hear, he said very nice videos on YouTube, very good talking points.
Yeah. So it's been 1 year since El Salvador adoption. Like a lot of us haven't traveled to El Salvador. Like, how are things? Is Bitcoin helping the common people on the street? Like, not just the techies and the government.
Right, so the question is, how are things in El Salvador? Is Bitcoin helping common people on the street? I would say yes. So tourism is up like 30 some odd %. GDP is double digits growth. And there are lots of companies setting up shop in El Salvador. But if you read the mainstream media, it's going horribly wrong and total failure.
You know, the one thing that doesn't get reported on much, and I made a little documentary about going down there, is that we interviewed lots of people, and so many people, when they launched Bitcoin in El Salvador, they were giving out this $30 reward on Chivo. You sign up on Chivo, the centralized government wallet, you get $30 of Bitcoin. So many people in El Salvador had their IDs jacked from that, and that, in my opinion, has tainted it in a lot of people's minds, because they would go to the app, they'd try to input their, their ID card number, and they'd find that it had already been registered. And so I don't know how I would do it over again. I think the government needed to, I guess, make sure that that was a secure way of getting a Chivo wallet. But I think that's a criticism. I think as Bitcoiners, we want to be very supportive of these first countries that make these steps, but privacy is a very big element to Bitcoin, and they essentially created this giant honeypot for hackers to go in and take people's IDs, and they weren't really ready for that. So it's my 2 cents.
They definitely rushed the launch, and they weren't ready for a number of things, but it has cleaned up. So there are, I have staff in El Salvador.
It's a much better app.
Yeah, Jan 3, and they're saying people are starting to use it again. But I did see, when they first did the law, when I was there, a lot of stores said they would accept it, but when you actually tried to pay, they said, yeah, it's not working, we're not accepting it right now. So there were a ton of issues with the launch. I don't know if there's any way to fix it. It's just, you kind of have to start organically. It would have been nice if it was working perfectly when they did their $30 airdrop, but can't go back in time.
Assuming there's some question, how much pushback are getting countries from the IMF and the World Bank when they're trying to improve it?
This question was how much pushback is there from the IMF when you're trying to push for Bitcoin adoption? Well, generally the IMF doesn't really like Bitcoin adoption. I'm not sure if it's necessarily IMF. It could be other, 3-letter agencies or other governments that we don't want to talk about. But I know that there was pressure in Honduras. So this was before Miami. There were some people probably wearing dark suits in Honduras talking to them about not adopting Bitcoin. And of course they said, their central bank put out a letter saying, we're not going to do Bitcoin. But there's constant pressure everywhere to not adopt Bitcoin, because that's the legacy system. Adopting Bitcoin definitely erodes their power and influence. So they're not going to go without a fight. So we just have to keep pushing ahead and seeing if there are allies that we can make, like President Bukele, that have the courage to stand up and try to do what's best long term. This is the key thing. Doing the right thing long term is very difficult, right? If we were to try to fix Canada from the mess we're in right now, I don't think a 4-year term would allow that, because fixing something that broken needs probably a decade. So you have to make sure that someone is there to see it for the long run. Whereas if you have someone that just is in it for the short run, they'll probably comply with IMF or whoever and say, yeah, we won't do Bitcoin, and we'll get some money now, but that's just short-term, high time preference thinking. But unfortunately, that pervades a lot of the world today. So the key is to find people that are in it for the long haul and are willing to forego luxuries and take the ferry to Vancouver and do what's right.
I might just add to that. The IMF is like a drug pusher. They want as many countries as possible to take loans, because loans that these countries take from the IMF, it gives the IMF access to power within the country to change all sorts of laws. And so when you come out like Samson and you say, hey, you can launch a bond onto a private market and it can fund the El Salvadorian government, that's a threat to the IMF. So watch what happens with this bond, because if that goes really well, it gets oversubscribed, IMF's going to come down hard. You're going to see a lot more attacks on Bitcoin after that, in my opinion.
And just for the record, I'm feeling great. Totally not suicidal at all.
No.
I think a lot of us are hodlers. We buy Bitcoin as a store of value. What sorts of things do you see has to happen before more of us start using it? Start spending on Bitcoin, create lists, regardless of whether or not it's been legalized, right? To say, look, you're going to sell your car to me, I'll give you a Bitcoin. What sorts of things do you see has to happen before, that kind of, widespread use? You want to buy a shirt for Bitcoin right now?
Yeah.
So the question is, we're all hodlers. What will be the catalyst to get people to spend their Bitcoin?
Yeah, a series of things that have to happen.
Well, I think the biggest one is, for any sizable purchase, it's going to be the capital gains part, right? And just favorable regulation and laws around that, right? If you can remove that part, then people will just start using Bitcoin as money. But as long as that's there, it's a big barrier. It's probably a bigger barrier than like on-chain fees or anything like that. But definitely Lightning helps. Having layer 2 ways to pay for things quickly helps. But at the end of the day, it's really the treatment of Bitcoin and how you tax Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think it really does start with you, right? You go out, give your waiters or cab drivers tips in Bitcoin. All this Bitcoin adoption, like the story of El Salvador was people deciding to use it as a currency. It wasn't pushed upon them. They decided to voluntarily do it. And it grew and it grew and it grew to a nation state level, right? And so no one's going to force you to sell your Bitcoin or trade it for things. You make that decision. But when you do, it contributes, and it just, even one time of you selling your Bitcoin to buy like a coffee or something, it plants seeds in people's minds. So, if you don't want to sell, if you want to just hodl, you can do that. But what I do, and I think Jeff Booth has recommended this, is if you want to start using your Bitcoin, just replace it, right? Buy a coffee with Bitcoin or whatever, and then just buy the Bitcoin back with fiat. But, starting that process and getting it moving is magical. And El Salvador is proof of it, so.
If there's an attack vector nation state could use, what would be the most effective one? What's the one vulnerability against Bitcoin?
So the question was, if there was an attack vector the nation state could use on Bitcoin, what would be that vulnerability? I don't really think there is one. Probably something like Executive Order 6102, where you're actually going after people. The success rate is questionable, but at least it would be a major knock on Bitcoin. But I don't really see anyone doing that. It would just cause more problems than it would solve. Like it would erode confidence in their entire legal structure, like enforcing the Emergency Act because of a protest, right? So yeah, I don't think that would happen. Banning mining won't work either. We saw that in China, right? And then there's just an exodus. If you ban it I think they're talking about banning mining in the US, but then they'll just come to Canada, hopefully. hopefully Pure and us will all welcome them to come mine in Canada. But what else is there that they can do?
I think exchanges are kind of a good attack vector, you know?
Yeah, but you can trade Bitcoin peer-to-peer. It's not really an attack vector. It'll hurt traders of some, to some degree, but
it could hurt the liquidity, I think, you know. I
think it should be okay. It will survive that. There's enough stuff being built on layer 2s and with privacy that we could weather that. So I just don't think there's a really good way for nation states to attack. It's too late. The best time to attack was probably during the block size wars, right? That was when we were kind of weak and we were infighting. So they could have done something pretty badly then. But nowadays, I just don't see any big attack.
I think the biggest attack vector would be to have a responsible monetary policy.
Yeah, I agree.
Price suppression in the futures markets, maybe?
Question over there?
You said price suppression in the futures markets?
Yeah, something you could do to get people this money printed by holding the price down lower.
So what was it?
Price, basically using futures markets to
Yeah, but that doesn't attack. That just gives everyone cheap Bitcoin, right? It's a question of who can keep it up longer. So I do feel like there is some price suppression happening. But, I mean, it's an opportunity for everyone else that has conviction, right? So everyone that is stacking at these prices, like it's ridiculous that we're still below the 200-week moving average. Like, this is just the best opportunity. It's like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And everyone I know is still accumulating. So it's like, if they can keep it up, good for them. But there's not that many Bitcoin left. So I'd say it's good.
I think there's an analogy, as you mentioned, futures, that they could do to Bitcoin what some people think they've done to gold, right? But the difference with Bitcoin is that the supply is 100% verifiable, right? You cannot verify the total amount of gold that exists. These things aren't operating on a public ledger, right? So it's very easy to create synthetic products, do swaps, all sorts of really tricky things behind the scenes. And I know that the futures that we have mostly right now are not they're not Bitcoin delivery, but it's a lot harder to suppress via futures because of the transparency of Bitcoin.
So I've been mining Bitcoin for about 10 years.
Oh wow!
I've seen Bitcoin go from home GPU to home ASIC to on-grid ASIC, industrial, to finally where we're at. It seems to be behind the grid with good companies. It's the ones that are doing green energy, ones like solar and wind. Bad companies, marathon. Ones that are doing coal. And I know this is happening. That's the future of Bitcoin mining. You will be behind the grid, behind the meter. Because I work for one of those companies. But the thing is, we're going to get to a point where the coal miner just can't exist anymore. It's going to be these companies that can afford multi-million or hundreds of $1 million investments in these Bitcoin miners that are using unused energy, which is good. But we get to a point where there's going to be a very small handful of miners. Do you see that as a problem to the Bitcoin network?
Do you want to recap the question?
Do you think because of the difficulty of the hash rate going up that it's going to centralize the parties that can mine? Is that basically
It's not the hash rate, it's energy. And,
the margins are getting so slim with Bitcoin mining that you can no longer just mine with an at-home ASIC. It's not going to be possible. For 10-cent energy, you can't do it. So it's going to be these massive companies that are working with green energy companies or coal plants behind the meter that are able to buy power for 2 or 3 cents a kilowatt hour. And there's no way that one person can just do home mining anymore. It's going to be massive entities with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of ASICs. Is that an issue?
I wouldn't say that's entirely true. Like if you have a solar setup, your cost of energy production is basically free, except for the replacement of the batteries over 10 years.
Generally, if you have a small solar setup, your cost of energy is still pretty high. If you even amortize that over 10, 20 years, we're talking about things like gigawatts.
But that's if someone wants to start something from scratch. If I already have a free energy source, I can just pick up an S9 and start mining. It doesn't become unprofitable for me, right? If I get an S9 I can borrow from a friend, I have basically free energy, I can still continue to mine profitably, right?
Probably with your one S9, but you're talking about these companies that have hundreds of thousands of ASICs. It's going to be a drop in the bucket.
so the question was, basically home miners are going to have a challenge because of energy cost and just economies of scale for bigger miners. So I guess, is it a problem that there's fewer people mining at home and everything is concentrated, right?
That's right.
So, I mean, there are ways around that. You can host your miners somewhere else, and if the hosting provider is good, some are bad, but let's say like Blockstream does hosting. I think one of the goals for Blockstream was to be able to host smaller number of units of miners, like 5 or 10. That was at least the vision. But of course, there's a shortage, and it has to make money as a business. So we're still they're still catering to larger customers, enterprise level. But I think you could have people that do cater to smaller customers. The challenge is always going to be, you're at your home, you're paying residential rates for power, right? Whereas for industrial places, you're paying cheaper. You can't really compete against that no matter what, right? It's just, you have to get some industrial price power somewhere. But like you're saying, solar is an option, maybe solar. Yeah, I think if enough people do like a little bit here and there, then maybe it's okay. But maybe you have to mine at a loss to secure the network too, or mine with expectations that you're not breaking even. You're just getting Bitcoin and Sats, right? But it is a problem that I've been thinking of, but I don't have a good solution for it yet, just because economies of scale are economies of scale. You can't get around that, right? But maybe we could create some at-home mining products, right? I don't know if you remember the block eruptors, right? I think that would be cool, where you have a mining pool paying out in more or less real time as blocks are found over Lightning to people using block eruptors. And if you have enough of those around the world, it might make up some non-trivial amount of hash rate.
So Samson, maybe you can elaborate on this, because this is a thing that a lot of people are realizing about using methane flares to mine Bitcoin. Is it could actually make Bitcoin carbon negative. Maybe you can elaborate or explain that to the audience in your
Well, you pretty much explained it.
Yeah.
So methane that would normally be flared is just converted to energy powering miners. So
Is that like 10x? Is that like 84x?
Yeah.
84x the impact of CO2.
So, when people go drilling for oil, they might strike a leak in the ground, and then you get methane flaring in the atmosphere. And you can either burn it, and that just turns it into CO2, but you don't get anything from it. You can try and capture it for energy, but that doesn't work if you're not near somewhere with electrical pipelines and infrastructure. Or you can get a big steel container with a Bitcoin miner, and you can set it up, and you can hook up a generator to turn that methane into Bitcoin and also convert that methane into CO2. And essentially, that in the world of ESG and carbon credits, you're removing greenhouse gases from the environment. And so there's a future, I think, where Bitcoin miners are going to definitely take advantage of that. And not only will they produce Bitcoin, they'll produce heat, and they could potentially produce carbon credits to offset other things. And grid balancing as well. Well, I think if they're off grid, I don't know if that makes a difference, but yeah.
One thing I want to say to add to that, actually, another cool thing that Bitcoin mining is doing, and what a company I work for is doing, is we're doing behind-the-meter green energy. So a lot of people don't know this, but wind farms and solar farms, especially in grids like Texas ERCOT grid, they actually have to shut off their load, or their load onto the grid a lot of the time, because the prices are favorable. Prices actually go negative, so they pay money to send their wind energy onto the grid. So we're partnering with these wind companies to actually take that useless power that's stranded and turn it into Bitcoin. So there's good and there's bad, because it's going to get to the point where there's fewer and fewer miners that can do what we're doing, but we're also incentivizing green energy.
Yeah, the largest problem, with this massive...
Probably these guys didn't hear anything he said.
This is to build off your point. One of the large problems that we're going to have if we want to move to green energy, solar and wind, is that you're only as strong as your weakest link. So you're only, your grid has to be able to, you have to have enough solar panels and windmills to support the least windiest and the least sunniest day of the year. But that means the other 364 days of the year, you might be producing excess electricity. And when you have a grid, you can't just produce excess electricity. You're going to short circuit everything in your appliances. So you have to send it somewhere, or you have to turn off your machinery. Turning off your machinery can damage it pretty quickly, right? And like you said, your other option is to send it to another grid, but it might be negative prices. Bitcoin mining, if you can set up miners that can use that electricity, can actually help balance the grid. So when you have overproduction, that electricity is actually productive, which is another thing that means that Bitcoin is actually really pushing the move towards green energy, not polluting and destroying the earth like so many people will tell you. Yeah.
What projects are you most excited about that are being built on layer 2?
Liquid?
Yeah, and on Liquid. Yeah.
The question is, which projects am I most excited that are being built on layer 2? I think all the stuff that's being built on Liquid is exciting because it functions already. We already have Tether issued there. Like all the building blocks are ready, right? I think a lot of people are excited about Taro and RGB and other stuff, but I think those are far more ethereal and less production ready. And they're going to have a lot of uphill battle to get adoption. But all the stuff that's being built on Liquid, it's we were missing a lot of pieces for a very long time. But I think now we have everything ready. So we have the swaps, you have the decentralized marketplace. There's also, I don't think they're calling it algo stablecoin, but it's like a Bitcoin-backed stablecoin from Fuji Money. Same guys, the multiple venture guys. But you can lock up Bitcoin and borrow FUSD. I think it's named aptly. But you can borrow FUSD and basically not have to sell your Bitcoin. And it's all done on Liquid, and it's all done with smart contracts on Liquid. So for me, that's the most interesting part of the ecosystem because you have all that stuff, but you also have the base layer of privacy. And what I want to do is get more people aware of the need for privacy and the need for things like confidential transactions and the like.
Are Fedimints like a competitor to Liquid? Is that competing for the same type of use case?
So the question is, are Fedimints competing against Liquid? It's the same kind of use case. So there are a lot of Bitcoiners that don't like Liquid because it's a federation and it's centralized because these people are running the block producers. But that's kind of what a Fedimint is, except for you don't have that same robust architecture. Like these guys are all running their functionaries in a data center. You have 100% uptime unless they're down for whatever reason, but not all 15 are going to be down. But with the Fedimint, like what if the people signing are on vacation or they're just not available, right? I don't know how exactly that will work, but you're not going to have that same level of uptime and basically business level production environment. But Fedimints and Liquid are kind of similar, right, in that regard, except for you pick your own and spin up your own for a Fedimint. But I don't think it's competing. I'm not really sure what the use case is. When Fedimints launched, they said it's going to replace people keeping their money on exchanges. I'm not sure, but I think a Fedimint is a great way to put small amounts of money and have privacy, right? You put your Bitcoin in, and then you send it over Lightning, and it's like a mixer. So I see that as being a big value add to the ecosystem.
So I just got to ask, so you say with Liquid there's these 15, I don't want to call them validators, you call them like black boxes.
Functionaries.
Functionaries. Can that expand? Or is it like locked?
Yeah, it can. So there was an update last year called DynaFed, Dynamic Federation. So now you can add and remove functionaries anytime. So it's all done through the blocks and through the functionaries, selecting new functionaries or removing functionaries. I think there's a question there.
Switching gears to the derivatives market, Gary Gensler is about to make decisions on Ethereum, or I should say, proof-of-stake projects indicated as securities. We got Caitlin Long of GBTC applying pressure to SEC for banking licenses and spot ETF licenses to come out. Do you have any insight into what's going on with regulation on the American?
Do you want to recap the question?
He's asking if you have any insight on what's going on with the American regulatory environment. So, yeah, I think Gary Gensler came out and said, proof of stake might make at the security.
Long-term ETFs that have just been settled in US dollars and seem to be printed every trade that takes place. Do you see any pressure coming out of the US to settle this?
Do you have any birdies at the SEC?
No. I don't really know if the pressure will work because I think if they did approve a spot ETF, then Bitcoin price will jump massively. And they don't want to do that, so they're dragging their feet. That's why they're approving everything but a spot ETF, because all the institutional money, the pension funds, whatever, they'll be able to access at that point. And I don't think they want that access. They don't want responsibility for making Bitcoin jump. Like, the SEC generally doesn't want to be viewed as impacting markets in any way. So I think that is the concern. But I don't know how it's gonna play out. Like the lawsuits, the GBDC lawsuit and everything like that. Maybe it'll have an effect. I don't know. But it's just interesting to watch.
Anybody else?
Hey guys, I'm going to talk about the green energy technology for mining a little bit, but first I'm just watching what's happening with the merge. And seeing what mainstream media is reporting that the most important market is energy prices needing energy anymore. I was wondering if you have any insight or kind of thoughts about public perception on mining, being very negative, and some ways to make Bitcoin exactly what we want to do that, and kind of put that message out there that there's a lot of technology upside to it, when we push back with any
I didn't catch most of it. Something about green energy?
So I think it's about, now that we have a pretty clear-cut narrative, Ethereum is proof of stake, Bitcoin's proof of work, how do we as Bitcoiners fight against that FUD that, Bitcoin is just super wasteful?
I don't know. Do we need to fight the FUD? I mean, they can't do anything. All they can do is complain.
Change the code, man.
Yeah, change the code, clean up the code. But, well, maybe some people might not buy Bitcoin, but then that's a good thing, right? So everyone just gets Bitcoin at the price they deserve. If you think Bitcoin is dirty and takes too much energy, then make your choice and sleep in the bed that you make. But like Saylor is trying to fight it, I think, because he wants more people to buy Bitcoin and he wants Bitcoin price appreciation. But if we just did nothing, I don't think anything would happen. Like, there's not a need for us to go and campaign against the energy fund, because all the people that are like pushing that narrative or whatever, they're going to freeze their asses off in winter. The natural selection will take care of itself.
So I think you quoted this book on your Twitter. It's called Fossil Future,
Yeah.
right? So that book has a really interesting premise, and that's essentially that when we talk about fossil fuels and energy usage, we're focused on the negative side effects of fossil fuels and not the primary effects of fossil fuels, which is providing so much energy at any moment to any given thing. And so the way that a lot of like ESG, pushers, environmentalists push this is that fossil fuels are destroying the earth. They don't talk at all, and to have an honest discussion about all the benefits that they provide as well. So I think if you want to push the idea that Bitcoin's proof of work is good, you have to push first the idea that there's no such thing as bad energy usage, that the creation and the use of more energy has always been a net benefit for humanity. And this idea that we need to just use less energy is just, it doesn't work as an argument, right? So we have to be pro-energy creation of all sources. It's the key to human flourishing. And Bitcoin is just one user of it, very small. So
that's the great thing about living in reality where the laws of physics don't change. Because
Yeah.
if you're wrong, then you get to be in the cold, right? Vitalik was saying he wants his own reality and his own malleable physics, right? But at the end of the day, everyone lives in the real world, and you need energy in the real world.
yeah. All right.
I heard you say that it would be cool if the nation state started by Bitcoin. Do you think, what do you think would be the first nation state of centralized?
So the question is, I guess you're referencing my tweet. It'd be cool if a country started printing fiat and buying Bitcoin, and they totally can do that, right? So I don't know who would be the first. It's got to be, well, you have a few requirements there. They have to have their own shitcoin. I mean, they have to have their own fiat currency, right? And then they have to know about Bitcoin and think that Bitcoin is going to be valuable. And then they have to probably do it a little bit secretly at first, not openly, because then they'll just start everyone front-running them, right? So I don't know who could do that. You'd have to have someone quite clever that has a fiat currency. Like basically a President Bukele that is just going to get a lot of Bitcoin for free.
They'd be really going against the U.S. though. It would have to be a country that was somewhat distant from the U.S. or willing to risk the relationship.
It worked really well for Gaddafi. So
Yeah.
Don't try and undermine the US dollar if you're another country. That's bad advice.
Two people tried to do it and both dead.
Yep, don't do it. All right.
Hey, I'm Dave. I go by Reverend Model on Twitter. And first, a quick comment and then a question for Samson. I was hanging out in Austin for a while, and Austin Bitcoin Club, you might be familiar. And I just want to say, you know, it's a cool scene there, but what's going on with the BTC Vancouver, when I got back here, I was absolutely delighted. And the reason I stand up is I just want to encourage everybody to get up there and build this thing. Vancouver can be absolutely the place in the country to make Bitcoin what we want it to be. And yeah. So invite your friends, support development like you in North Vancouver. Do whatever we can. Build something, whether you're a coder or whether you're somebody that can get up and write a song or do an artist thing. I just think that we really got to get this going. We're in a war, and it's going to be us or them. I think we're winning, but we got to keep our feet to the, keep our feet on the gas. So, Samson, my question for you is, and I understand geopolitics are crazy, but we've got this thing happening with Ukraine and Russia, and Putin says, okay, we're going to use crypto, but is that code for maybe we're going to be looking at Bitcoin through the BRICS? Or do you think like Iran and places like this, are we going to see something going on there? What's your opinion on that?
So I think everyone heard the question, is Russia going to use Bitcoin? I don't know, but I think they need to, because a lot of their assets are frozen right now. They're cut off from the financial system. If they don't use Bitcoin, then they can't really survive long term. That's why I think most countries have to adopt Bitcoin. It's a sooner or later than if they may or may not, because it's a necessity. The entire banking system in the world is actually crumbling. It's getting harder and harder to get a bank account. Like, not even talking about Bitcoin companies or crypto companies, just normal companies. Like, go and try to get a bank account somewhere. It's getting very hard. And then banks themselves are crumbling under the requirements being put on them by legal framework. Like, you have to check every transaction and basically do a background check on everybody. And that's not a sustainable system. So eventually we will go to Bitcoin. So maybe Russia will go to a Bitcoin standard.
So as a follow-up, and it kind of was part of the last question, so would it be done in a clandestine way, perhaps, or like maybe has it already happened?
If it was happening, then we would see the price going up. But the question was, will it be done in a clandestine way? I don't know, but if someone wanted to do that, they'd probably do it clandestinely at first.
How big is Bitcoin versus regular currencies?
How big is Bitcoin versus regular currencies?
In the world.
We're tiny.
Yeah, that's what
I think at the peak it was like the 7th biggest in the world by market cap.
out of all central bank currencies?
I think you're talking like M1 supply or something like that, but not.
Well, in dollar value. Like it was, I think at the 69K Bitcoin market cap was like 1.3 trillion, which would have made it the 7th largest currency by market cap, or something like that. Don't quote me on it. Right. I have a question for you. You know Bukele. How does he get the money to buy Bitcoin? Like, how does that work? Is there an amount that was like set aside when they passed the law that you can just dip into, or like where does the money come from?
I can't comment on that.
No. Feel bad for Salvadorans. Kidding.
Yeah, but to your comment earlier, I'm actually surprised there's this many people that want to talk about Bitcoin in Vancouver. I always thought Vancouver was kind of shitcoiny, but this is great.
Of all the places you could have lived, Samson, why did you choose Victoria?
I was born in Victoria.
All right. Final words.
I don't know, I'm tired. I I don't know. Just keep doing what you're doing. This meetup is great, and I'd say good job and keep it up.
Thanks so much for coming out. We all really appreciate it. Thank you. Hey there, thanks so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you want to watch more videos like this, please check out the Kinetic Finance channel down below, where we're posting videos like this, whether it be interviews, shorts, or other long-form content every single week. If you want to support this channel, please give it a subscription as well. Every single one of you counts, and I love interacting with this community that we're building here. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.